By clinical definition, autistic skill regression is autistic. It is not dissociation or trauma. However, big caveat here. We have to remember that autism very rarely shows up by itself. And we have to remember that the perfect taxonomy of things gets muddled with the fact that autism tends to come with friends, other mental health conditions, as well as a predisposition to be sensitive to the environment for many of us, which means we are more likely to experience trauma for a number of reasons. So trauma is anything that is beyond our ability to cope with both our internal resources and our external support. Autism affects both of those. We can be hypersensitive to our environments. We can be very sensitive emotionally. We can be very sensitive neurologically. We can be hypersensitive. As such, we are more likely to experience the world in a hostile way. Autism also causes a social deficit and communication deficits very often. Because of that, that means that we have a harder time communicating what we need to others, and it has a deficit in terms of maintaining social relationships in a way that we can actually utilize those and get the support we need. So, because of that, we are far more likely to experience trauma and therefore trauma-related disorders. And dissociation is adjacent to trauma disorders, right? Because dissociation is fundamental to certain aspects of things like PTSD, but also are their own disorders. So, when we talk about something like skill regression in autism, we have to recognize that very often there is a comorbidity of trauma, of burnout, and other kinds of things influencing this. So, for example, I burnt out really badly after I graduated from seminary. I burnt out terribly, and I was still overclocking myself through the end of that year. I graduated in May, and I still had contracts that I was supposed to be fulfilling till the end of the year. But by the time the end of the year came around, I was done. I was fundamentally just overwrought, and after I left the context I was in, I finished out my contracts, and I ultimately collapsed. And that had to do with both autistic issues, as well as my trauma, as well as dissociation, as well as a number of different physical factors I have. Now, can I tease them all out and say which one is which? Not really, because they all kind of converge together in a nice little, yarn ball of fuckery. And the yarn ball of fuckery, it doesn't really matter that one was autism or one was trauma or one was one or the other. As I began to deal with the traumatic aspects, sometimes it became more obvious that certain elements of this were skill regression related to autism. Some of these became more obvious that there was dissociation in play, and my skill sets regressed because of dissociation. The part of me that was doing certain things in certain times was essentially asleep because of my dissociative disorder, and it was resting, and so other parts of me had taken over and didn't have the same frames of knowledge. So there are absolutely the ability to have these things appear on the surface to be the same thing, or all be conflated together. Technically, by diagnostic criteria, they are separate things, but because humans are complex and can have many things together, yes, technically they can show up together, and it can be hard to tease that yarn ball of fuckery apart when you're in the midst of it.